How is before I get into today's slightly different and epic journey, I want to thank all the people who have watched this channel and who support me and keep me going. And when you say things like these videos have helped you get through the madness of the Rona and stuff like that, that means an awful lot to me. That really does. And again, I'm not a guru or anything like that. I'm not the one who's leading this. I'm in the same position you are. And, excuse me, irritate the throat. I'm in the same position you are. And I need this as much as you need me. It's a two-way thing. So I have to thank you too for that as well. As well as like buying my books and sharing these videos around, supporting my films on Patreon and things like that. It's really sweet, and it makes me very appreciative and very grateful. And thank you so much. And I love you all and don't take any of you for granted. Always know that. And I think it's maybe the weather today. It's dull and dreary, and your mind wanders, goes off into tangents and things like that. And today, 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 I was just thinking about the state of the world. You know, not just the whole Rona thing, but the things that you see going on around you. You have a situation now where people are waking up, but it's definitely a pivot point moment. Yeah, some are waking up. It's amazing to see people outside Buckingham Palace, and you know, calling them paedophiles and everything like that. It's amazing to see that, and it's amazing to see all those people that marched in Dublin on the weekend. And a good friend of mine from Cork went, and he said it was one of the most beautiful things he ever took part in. He said he'd be skeptical like me when it comes to these kind of things, and uh, to see the way those people get treated in the Irish media, you have everything from politicians to washed up scumbags, celebrities, lowlifes, looking for a bit of PR because their careers have failed. You have all kinds of TV dregs and media pundits, arseholes that are weeped out going, I'm on fucking. The allergies are really fucking bad this year. It's just like the fucking growth is incredible this year. The amount of pollen this year is driving me crazy. But just like, I'm dying, I'm on fucking chemo, and all these people who went to that march are killing me because they're irresponsible bastards and all this stuff. And the visceral hatred towards these people who are doing nothing other than asking for their freedom. That's it. They're doing nothing else. And you see the hatred and the vitriol uh, put against them. And not one of these fuckers, whether it be Jedward, those two freaks, or anyone else who slagged them off, mentioned the golf tournament with the 81 politicians. So you can see how the establishment rose in its bitches. The bitches are all rode in, corralled and lassoed and rode in to defend them, to distract from that. It's really sickening. It's really sickening. So a bunch of politicians who, at the very least, know there's no pandemic and just don't care. Two, know there's no pandemic and are loving it rubbing in the fucking faces of the ordinary people who are basically prisoners of these restrictions. Either way, it's horrible. And yet these fuckers like Jedward and all these other pieces of shit, who do they go after? People asking for their freedom, not the politicians, ordinary citizens. And I saw a thing like even some immigrant group called them a white nationalist march, and yet there was loads of black people in the crowd and loads of people of all different colours and races. And even one woman that made a speech there has a history of fighting for refugee rights in Ireland, and yet these lefties still have to spin it around and call it a white nationalist march. That's how despicable the establishment are, the left wing establishment. And this is not an accident. This is what this video is really about today. it's the end of the empire. What happened? What went on in Rome about 200 BC to 300 BC is currently happening with the West right now. So many things are being repeated. Before I get to that, examples why, there was a there's a a field of biology, sort of like biology meets evolutionary science, known as behavioral sync. And what behavioral sync is has been around for a very long time, well, a fair long time, where they study colonies of animals, usually rats, and they will try to come up with a models of how the rats behaved in certain environments, artificial environments created for them, uh, and then try to see if there's a correlation with human society. One of the reasons they picked rats is because, well, rats are highly intelligent animals to begin with. They seem quite cognitive. They are also have a society similar to humans in that they cohabitate in rat society, but there's also a strong sense of individuality you wouldn't get in many other mammals, and that's one of the reasons why you wouldn't get that in wolves and things like that, and that's why they're used in human behavioral studies because they're a lot like humans. They're very good parents and so on. The females are, and they seem to have driven by many of the same impulses as human. So in these behavioral sync models, one of the famous experiments they did was to create a rat utopia, a place where rats had large numbers of rats. Now, when the rats were at their when they had created situations where the rats were rapid food shortages and so on, the rats seemed to reproduce faster. Wherever there was dangers of fights within the rats, they'd reproduce faster, and they seem to be it's almost like an evolutionary impulse that the more of us there are, the better chance we have of survival, which makes perfect sense. But what makes it really interesting is, and this is quite amazing and very telling, is that they created this rat utopia where the rats had all the food they ever wanted. They were safe from other rats. They were basically allowed to do and live as they want. They took away things like behavioral experimentations of them having to do this, do that. And took them on, just gave them the Epicurean lifestyle. The Epicurean lifestyle for rats. And what they discovered was the rats were far more drastically altered by this utopian Epicurean rat world than they were in any other previous stage leading up to it. So, for instance, things manifested, like new hierarchies manifested. Female rats would bond into certain tribal groups, and these female rats would separate themselves from the other female rats and the other males, and would not have babies. Feminists. Cannibalism would then start to creep in among the upper rats, the more sort of the rat upper class in these experimental models. Even though there was an abundance of food, the the rats would eat rats from the lower classes, the lower rat levels. They would for no reason. There's no reason for it. There was plenty of nutrition available for them. Another one would be that they would become sexually perverted. That the rats at the top would be fucking everything in sight, and usually like even not only each other but also incestual groupings, which rats apparently are quite what's the word, wary of, and also infantile rats being raped by adult male rats, and female rats, this kind of thing, and. Uh, and what we saw was a microcosm of what the world is now. And this behavioral sync model came to the conclusion that as a society reaches a high standard of living, a sense of success, accomplishment of many of the social goals, that they will fall into the model of behavioral sync. And it's just, you see it today. You have women not reproducing in the West, becoming feminist. Me Too or kind of thing. You have Mass perversion. The aristocrats are desperately trying to legalize pedophilia. We saw what's happened with Epstein Island. They're desperately trying to legalize pedophilia to get these people off the hook. And you have the other situations too, like, you have Bill Gates and the rest of them making meat alternatives from human feces. Well, human feces contains human cell matter, so there's the cannibalism for you. And believe it or not, they will do so. They have to. They will, and they're probably already doing it. So they will replicate cellular structure from human tissue, and they will have us eating ourselves. Humans, silent green, or what's called as people, and that's what they're heading for. And it's just like the behavioral sync model. Now, in a social sense, in a cultural sense, a historical sense, the West is at the same place that the Roman Empire was about 200 to 300 AD. The decadence at the end of the Roman Empire, yeah, although the Christians invaded the Roman Empire, took it over, and then brutalized anyone who wasn't Roman, there was a decay in Roman pagan society leading up to that created this problem. So, for instance, you had things like the Dismanibus cult, which was became a worship of death. And you look at, and I'm an ex-goth and stuff like that, but we have a worship of death in society right now. And even you could see things like abortion as being a worship of death. And even the Rona thing was a death cult. The numbers racking up every day. It was a worship of death. That happened. You had other things too, like sexual degradation. And this was what the Romans had accused the Greeks of. They had done themselves. So, like, you had all these perversions among the Roman elite. And this was well documented in the fall of Greece. You'd have, like, these people who were basically dossers, who would sit around in a symposium all day being pleasured by prepubescent boys who would fillet them while they would talk about, philosophy and art. And a lot of this had to do, there was a slave society, okay? Now, when people think of slaves, the Roman and the Greek model of slaves was quite different. It was more like they were working class people. A slave wasn't someone who was whipped to do something necessarily. They were not citizens of the Republic, and they had their status would be like working class people in the 1800s. They didn't really have representation as such. So but they would have, like, some of them would be quite wealthy, successful. They would have the ability to, own homes and do all kinds of things. They had trades. Some of them were very successful business people, but they're still slaves. Some had a very high standard of living. Many lived with Roman families and were taken care of and looked after, and worked for them into the generation. But it was a slavery society, and this slavery created an idleness amongst the establishment. The establishment didn't have to do shit because it was done for them, and because they had built this whole world of of an underclass who would take care of them. And so the devil works, as the Christians say, the devil will find work for idle hands to do. And so it was going on, and this is where the perversions and the obsession with the sports. You look around now, like when I was growing up, football was on TV once a week. Now it's on every night of the week from all over the world. It's shoved down people's faces non-stop. And it's just like the Roman circuses thing. It's just like the Roman circuses. The gladiatorial battles and the plays put on, the entertainment, they ramped that up as the empire went into decay. Now, even the Roman Empire in the West has had their two similar events. The Iceni revolt in Britain in AD 60, it was exactly the same effect upon the Roman Empire that the 9/11 thing had. It started to create doubts within the structure. Are we so hot shit? Are we amazing? Why would someone want to do this to us? We built up the Britons. We brought them civilization, and now they wiped us out. And the same thing with 9/11. How could they do this to us? We're great people. We're America. We're the West. We're wonderful. So the same scenario applies. Now, in order to maintain control, the Romans eventually recruit the Christians into their worldview. So, especially the military, and this is what Constantine and Pyro and all that stuff comes from. And Christianity was seen as a cementing factor that could probably hold Roman society together. In fact, it destroyed it from within and tore it asunder, and it was the end of the Roman Empire. Now, the West is making the same mistake with Islam. You have the likes of the Pope Francis courting Islam, saying it's our religion too. The West are importing huge numbers of Muslims into Europe and stuff like that. And we're being told that's the religion of peace, it's the religion of the future. We should stop persecuting these people, blah 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 blah. And the same thing will happen when they get into power. You're going to see massive persecution of Christians, particularly Catholics, massive persecutions. Maybe not mass murders and stuff like that, but definitely they'll lose the legal representation will be taken from them under Sharia laws and things like that. And that's why it's still good. Could be a pagan will be ignored. I'm a firm believer in that kind of line below the radar. But you'll see massive persecution of Catholics, and it's already begun. Like here in Ireland, all the lefties are saying, "No way do I want to go back to Holy Catholic Ireland." But they're all like, masturbating over the Eid festival in Croke Park. They're masturbating over that. And even the bishops, the same bishops who told the Irish not to go up to the Reek on Reek Sunday, were all in that event of the animal sacrifice event in Croke Park. And this is it. It's the same thing. They're just like the Imperial Romans brought in the the Christians as a sort of a grounding factor, which actually became something that destroyed them from within. The West is doing the same with Islam. So behavioral sink is now taking place in the West. It's happening. You're not going to save the West. It's not going to happen. It's just the only thing you can do is to be like. You see, what's finding is interesting is that the Southern Europeans, because of the better climate and so on, and the abundance of food, were more likely to go into behavioral sink than the Northern Europeans, where, say, the pagans of Northern Europe, who had to work to survive, to stay warm, to make food, and so on, they didn't fall into the same perversions that the Southern Europeans did. That's a perfect example of because in Northern Europe there was always a need to fight the elements. Where in the sun-baked Mediterranean, where a fucking avocado will grow into your mouth when you're sitting there, life was easy. Life, it was warm, it was pleasant. There was an abundance of food. The sun cures illness. You didn't have to worry about freezing to death in winter. The pagans in Northern European were constantly fighting to survive, and that's why they didn't sink into behavioral sink. And even the Christians who who uh, who converted the Northern Europeans, pagans, often remarked that they were highly moral people, that they were like God, they were like Christians in how they saw the family structure, and they were very well, they were very well adjusted societies. Didn't stop them killing them, of course, but that's what they said about them. And compared to the decadence of Southern Europe, of the classical world, sped up the Christianization of Europe and the hatred of the pagans because of the decadence that was there and all the things I'm talking about, that was just talked about in the behavioral sink model. And it's happening with the West as a whole. Even in Northern Europe now, we have central heating. We have olives that come from Greece. We have feta cheese from Greece. We have dates from North Africa. We have anything. I can walk down. I can walk. I live in a a small rural community. I can walk down to the supermarket there and buy the world. Buy every kind of exotic fruit. Every kind of. It's all there. It's all there. And so I'm living in an extremely decadent time when you think about it. That's even compared to like the 90s or the 80s, where it was really only Irish and European products that were, not even, only Northern European products would be available in the supermarket. Now it's the whole world in a small village. And that's the decadence. And it's inevitable. I'm telling you, it's inevitable. You can sit there saying, I'm going to fight for the West and all this, but I'm going to fight for Christianity. It's inevitable. What the best thing you can do is to do, like, okay, this is highly speculative, but I'm a firm believer that when the Albigenese Crusade happened and the Cathars were exterminated by the Catholic Church, it's completely obvious that many Cathars would have went underground and continued to practice life as Cathars but pretending to be Christians. And that's what we do. That's how we will survive this. We as pagans, those of us who are pagans watching this, we're in a better situation, because they're not going to come after us, because we've no power in the world. We're nothing, and well, Christians have amazing power in Europe, and Catholics especially have enormous power in Europe, and they will be the prime targets, the destruction of Christianity, but particularly Catholicism, and you will see the crescent flying over St. Peter's Square, which will be named Shahrukh Square or something like that. That's going to happen. It's clear as anything. I tell you, it's going to happen. These cycles are secular. Now, this crashing of the Western economy may well be the establishment's means, because they're as smart as we are, some of them, but they employ people who will be as smart as we are, and they may be the establishment's means of trying to avoid the Western behavioural sink, and trying to knock us back to the 1950s or 30s, so we don't have the same decadence. Interesting idea. If it's true, I don't know. All I see are, a lot of the same things that you read about in the ancient Greeks and the Romans, about, like, reducing populations by starting wars. Well, they're doing the same thing now with technology, contraceptions, abortion, and more, all these kinds of other things to make it impossible, or to kind of clean the population out. So they're kind of following that model as well. It's still decadence, It's not what they call austerity today would be millionaire's lifestyle by the 1920s austerity idea of austerity, and that's how well off we are. And this thing with the Rona, we got a knock back. But again, I'm a firm believer that if you don't have to join the parallel. We have a parallel society. So as the West deteriorates into behavioral sink, we observe it, we see it. As the new religion once again comes from the East to take over and crush the old religion, which is Christianity, we observe, we live with it. But we do not lift our flag up and say, come and get us now. We become the parallel society within whatever the society is, and we survive and prosper. Take a leaf from things like Roma gypsies. Take a leaf from something like Irish travellers. No matter what happens, they always endure. They always endure because they're in the society, but they're not of the society. And the same thing will happen with us. We're like gypsies that way. And so I know it sounds a bit darkness and a bit negative. It's not really. It's if knowledge is power, and to be prepared for this collapse, this social collapse, and the growth of Islam is better than being sitting around like an innocent child, which so many adults are today, and thinking that your government is going to take care of you when they're the ones planning your annihilation, the annihilation of your culture and everything. And that's what's happening when people say, "How come our governments are giving more time to immigrants and calling us all racist because we love our country, and why are they giving us a hard time?" Well, what's happening to you now is exactly what happened to the pagans at the end of the Roman Empire. The pagans around, the ordinary pagans around Rome are going, what's the government handing over the army to these Christians for? What's this? We're the ones who built Rome. Does it sound familiar? It is familiar, because everything is in cycles. And watch it with interest, but don't watch it with fear. Experience it with contemplation, but don't experience it as a victim. Take care. Love you all. Talk soon.